Hello everyone, welcome to This Week in Stupid for the 11th of March 2017. If my voice sounds a little hoarse today, it's because we had the Liberalists meetup yesterday in London and it was really fantastic. But now my throat's kind of sore from talking to everyone all night, so I might sound a bit rough. Before I start, I'll just inform you about the live events I have coming up, because I've actually made a few more concrete plans with them. They're called, like, This Week in Stupid Live, because I didn't really know what to call them. So the next live event I'll be doing is on the 6th of April in Bristol, and this one will be called Acid Corbynism, and I will be spending about 45 minutes to an hour talking about Jeremy Corbyn. And for the talk that I'll be doing in Scarborough, I thought I'd talk about British identity, which is a pretty weird topic to talk about in this day and age, because there has been such a long campaign against the idea of a British identity that I thought it might be an interesting thing to try and piece together using historical references to Britain and the British from, well, their allies and enemies. See what they think of the British. You know, since we're not allowed to define this ourselves, I'm very confident that these are going to be very good talks, so links will be in the description. So we have an update from the Antifa protest at King's College London, where they stormed the stage and tried to bully me and Yaron Brook off the stage, and failed, and now we have their flag. One of the protesters has been identified as a King's College Student Union vice presidential candidate named Robert Liao. So in light of the protest, Shout Out UK, the publication I'm reading from, have been tipped off by an anonymous source that one of the candidates running for vice president, which is a full-time paid position of the student union, was on location supporting Antifa. This has put the spotlight on King's College London in terms of whom they allowed to run their student union elections. What we were sent were two screenshots, one from Instagram, one from Facebook. These prove that Robert Liao was not only present at the protest, but also present to support the protesters. And as you can see by his message there, he had even masked up. He says, "This is not what happened. I would be willing to meet you on campus to explain this situation. I am not anarchist, Antifa, or associated with Antifa, but I did mask up in self-defense because people were trying to film me. And I did happen to be associating with Antifa at the time." But he says he didn't use violence or condone the use of violence and was exercising his right to freedom of speech by protesting the event peacefully without the use of violence. Weird that you had to break into the event past the security guards to do that, Robert. I don't know why you didn't just buy a ticket and come and talk with everyone like a regular person. The tickets were available to the public, Robert. You didn't need to force your way in. You're welcome to come in. I, in fact, would love personally to have a conversation with you about this, because I am very interested to know how you came to be in a position where you were with a bunch of people who were willing to use violence against people who weren't fascists in order to shut down their freedom of speech. So after he defended himself, they say the argument might have stuck had it not been for the fact that in his right hand in the photograph and videos, he's holding a megaphone. That shows that he was not there as a victim of the protest, but rather as a participant, engaging in disruptive pro-Antifa activities. Weird how he doesn't have the courage of his own convictions. Weird how he can't stand up and say, yes, this is what I believe, this is what I did. And I think it's because he knows on a very fundamental level that what he is doing is wrong. Further evidence comes from the King's Libertarian Society, who said in a statement on the page, "At the exact second that masked Antifa protesters thundered into the lecture theatre, King's students stood up and began screaming, 'No fascists on campus!' They had been sitting in the room with megaphones waiting for action. This is more evidence that Robert Liao given his possession of the megaphone in the photograph." Wow, that's a really convincing story you have there, Robert. Shame your actions don't bear it out. But that really is the eternal problem with Antifa, isn't it? We're against fascism, but we are also trying to oppress you. Since we're on the subject of Antifa, there is a petition available called "Proscribe Antifa and Other Left-Wing Anarchist Groups as Domestic Terrorists." Groups such as Antifa have publicly boasted that they're willing to use violence in the name of social justice. In 2017, confidential documents reveal that US Homeland Security officials had classified Antifa as a domestic terrorist organisation. The UK should and must follow suit. I completely agree with this, and there is absolutely no doubt that Antifa use terror tactics as part of their strategy. They will literally tell you as much.
Fear is a part of our tactics. We do want Nazis to be afraid to organize in public. It's our job to go out there and say, no, we're not going to allow you to spread these ideas.
Antifa members will literally tell you that they use fear as a weapon of political coercion. That is what terrorism is. This is a terrorist group. They should be criminalized. The Antifa protests were the impetus behind the New York Times publishing an article called "We're All Fascists Now" by Bari Weiss. Christina Hoff Sommers is a self-identified feminist, registered Democrat with a PhD in philosophy and a wicked sense of humour. She is also a woman who says bad things. Things like, men and women are equal but there are differences between them. Or, the gender gap in STEM fields isn't simply the result of sexism. Or, contrary to received wisdom, the American school system actually favours girls and not boys. So the problem isn't that Christina Hoff Sommers says bad things. The problem is that she says true things. And because of this, in advance of the lecture, 9 student groups, among them the Portland National Lawyers Guild, the Minority Law Students Association, the Women's Law Caucus, the Jewish Law Society, and the school's Young Democratic Socialists of America chapter, sent a letter protesting the appearance by this known fascist. The letter added that her invitation amounted to an act of aggression and violence, and went on to offer a curious definition of free speech. Freedom of speech is certainly an important tenet to a free and healthy society, but that freedom stops when it has a negative and violent impact on individuals. No, it doesn't. Speech cannot be violence by the definition of the words that you are using, and no, negative speech is free speech. What you are saying is that you only want to hear the things that you want to hear. Well, I'm sorry, you overgrown fucking children. You don't get to just simply shut people down because you think what they have to say is negative, regardless of how true it is, but to be honest with you, regardless of how false it is. For the lecture itself, a student wearing a jacket emblazoned with the command, "Stay woke," led protesters in shouting, "Microaggressions are real," and really, if you have to say that, it kind of brings the whole thing into question, doesn't it? And "no platform for fascists," even though she's not a fascist. Sommers, of course, handled matters as gracefully as possible, but had delivered only half her lecture before Janet Steverson, a law professor and the school's Dean of Diversity and Inclusion, asked her to cut her remarks short and take questions from the hardy souls who somehow survived the violence of her words. Wow, I'm really quite liking Bari Weiss here. At this point, such incidents have become so routine that it's tempting to wave them off. We shouldn't. What happened to Miss Sommers on Monday is a telling example of a wider phenomenon that reaches well beyond the confines of campus. Call it the moral flattening of the earth. We live in a world in which politically fascistic behaviour, if not the actual philosophy, is unquestionably on the rise. I actually don't like calling Antifa fascists, because everything that the fascists did, the communists did to a much greater degree. Italy just gave the plurality of its vote to a party that is highly sympathetic to Vladimir Putin. The Philippines is in the grip of a homicidal maniac who is allying himself with Xi Jinping. Yes, I did listen to my Chinese commentators. Mr. Xi anointed himself president for life and has banned the words "animal farm" and "disagree" from Chinese internet searches. Bashar al-Assad is winning in Syria, where 500,000 people have so far been slaughtered. Dictatorship and starvation have descended on Venezuela. At its annual conference in Washington last month, the Conservative Political Action Committee gave its stage an enthusiastic applause to a member of France's National Front. That's just a short list. Yet, these are generally not the extremists that leftists focus on. Instead, they seem to believe that the real cause for concern are the secret authoritarians passing as liberals and conservatives in our midst. Yes, well, they are the ones who are helping the far right. They are giving cover to Islamists, they are giving cover to a massive and genuinely destructive migrant crisis, and they are attacking people who are not extremists, but think that these things should be prevented. So Bari Weiss asked the question, why are there so many demonstrably non-fascist people being accused of fascism? Well, partly she blames Donald Trump, and partly, as the writer David French has pointed out, this ritual we keep witnessing is of an in-group wielding its power against a perceived heretic, which comes from a deep human desire for a sense of belonging and purpose. I actually think it's a bit deeper than that, and it goes to the problem of far-left rhetoric. You see, when you have declared that everyone who opposes you is a fascist, that means anyone who opposes you must be a fascist, which means that if they are demonstrably not a fascist, and they can say something that will prove you wrong, then that seeks to undermine everything you have said up until this point, because you called everyone who opposes you a fascist. And there is also the moral conundrum of, what do you do when you have gone too far? But you've done this under the justification that the people you're opposing are evil. If they're not evil, and you have been the one terrorizing people who don't deserve to be terrorized because of their vile centrist beliefs, then you have a very large amount of humble pie to eat. And often it's very difficult for people to do that. I think that it's much easier to just run around and blindly call people who disagree with you fascists, rather than actually admitting that you were at fault. It rather undermines your own moral high ground, and it's something that I call the moral Rubicon. There's a point at which you have gone too far and you simply cannot go back. Look at many far-left activists, and I think you'll see this in process. Weiss ends the piece by saying, will true liberals do what it takes to reverse it? We can only hope so, because the battle against genuine authoritarian threats needs to be waged constantly, credibly and persuasively. Calling women like Christina Hoff Sommers and Mary Beard fascists and racist? I didn't realise that Mary Beard had been called a fascist and a racist. She incidentally wrote a feminist manifesto recently called Women and Power, and I'll do a video on that at some point as well, because it was remarkably interesting. But that only helps the other side, and that's all true. But the thing is, it seems that liberals don't have the fortitude to be able to oppose the far left, the SJWs, who are busy ruining everything. Seriously, name something in society that isn't currently being warped by social justice warriors, in some form or another. This nonsense is everywhere. And honestly, I think people are going to keep voting right-wing while the left is infested with this cancer. It is easy to understand if you know how to think about it. The true liberals actually need to be opposed to social justice first, because they are currently undermining everything the left does. There is no way of doing anything while these people are busy fucking up left-wing politics. Martin Sellner, an identitarian leader from a group called Identity Europa, which could roughly be called an alt-right movement, has been arrested coming into the UK. Now, I don't want people to get the impression that I think Martin Sellner has done anything wrong, because I don't think he has. I think he is just an activist. I'm not aware of any violence that he has instigated, let alone participated in self-defense, and neither has Brittany Pettibone. But for some reason, coming into the UK to be interviewed by Tommy Robinson, these people were both arrested. Sellner's plan was to hold a speech at Speaker's Corner in London, which, I have to say, means that he has done absolutely nothing wrong here, because that's the point of Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park, if anyone isn't familiar with it. And I am very, very concerned that the UK government has decided to merely criminalise their political opinions. Generation Identity published this. Yesterday, Martin Sellner and Brittany Pettibone were detained by the UK government and effectively declared political dissidents. The government has decided that Martin's talk about free speech is too dangerous to be heard. Don't worry, some of our activists will be reading his speech at Speaker's Corner, which was actually done today. We can't allow either the far left or the government to silence us. This is an article from voiceofeurope.com, which isn't something I'm particularly familiar with, but I'm guessing it's an alt-right European identitarian site. They say, Lauren Southern has revealed that after speaking to Brittany Pettibone on the phone, the police have detained the couple separately for the crime of having right-wing opinions, as well as wanting to interview Tommy Robinson and holding a speech. They haven't been detained for the crime of having right-wing opinions. As I understand it, they're being detained for allegations of wanting to stir up racial hatred. I have to stress to people in other countries, Britain does not have free speech. We have remarkably oppressive hate speech laws, and this is them in action. And if anyone connected to the British government just happens to listen to this, you are a fool as well. By criminalising these people, you turn them into martyrs. Not only do you set a terrifying precedent that will be extended and continue to paint Tommy Robinson as something that he is not, you are allowing them a PR victory. You are showing them that they will be persecuted when they will actually do nothing of harm. their message is not going to find widespread support. But now you actually give them legitimacy as activists. You should not do this. And not only that, it is a dangerous precedent to set. Imagine if somehow they did. Imagine if an identitarian movement took over Britain. What would be preventing this movement from merely pointing out what you did to them and saying, well, this is fair game? On what grounds would you even be able to defend yourselves? No good can come of using government force on peaceful activists, no matter how bad their activism is. And it allows them to make grandstanding points like this. They say, as the late Christopher Hitchens warned about these sort of developments back in 2009, and the detrimental consequences they would lead to by supporting the ridiculous notion of criminalising the made-up term of Islamophobia, ladies and gentlemen, I beseech you. I think it was beseech you. Resist it while you can and before the right to complain is taken away from you, which will be the next thing. You will be told you can't complain because you're Islamophobic. Well, that's pretty fucking true, isn't it? That was a remarkably prescient thing for the late great Mr. Hitchens to say. This is the thin edge of the wedge. There is an assault on free speech in my country, and it's being done in part by the government. Shifting gears slightly, it turns out that most people in Britain think feminism has gone far enough. The vast majority of Britons think women face prejudice in the workplace, but still believe feminism has gone as far as it should go, a Sky data poll reveals. Sky News commissioned a national survey for #100women, a special programme discussing the issues facing women in the UK. The poll found that 7 in 10 Britons believe men are paid more than women for the same work, while just 1% say the women are paid more. Well, that just goes to show you just how unbelievably effective propaganda can be. If 70% of people in Britain think men are paid more than women for the same work, then 70% of people in Britain are deeply misinformed. 2/3 say that men are favoured over equally qualified women by British bosses, compared to 5% who say women are favoured over men. I don't have any data regarding that in particular, but there are definitely examples of where women are sometimes massively preferred for certain positions over men. And it's not like there isn't a very well-supported advocacy movement to try and improve women's standing in the workplace, despite women not being disadvantaged in the workplace. And despite this, a total of 67% of Britons think feminism has either gone too far or gone as far as it should go, with just 1/3 saying it has not gone far enough. On the unlikely event that there are any feminists watching this, do you think those numbers are going to get better or worse? There is also little difference on this point by gender, with 61% of women thinking that feminism has either gone too far or as far as it should go. Only 1 in 3 Britons consider themselves to be feminists, with a figure at 42% for women and 25% for men. I find that very surprising, because a survey from about 2 years ago found that only 7% of people in Britain consider themselves to be feminist. So I think that I would definitely want to see more data on this. And I say this because 1 in 5 men say that they'd be less likely to want to start a romantic relationship with someone if they said they were a feminist, and just 2% said it made them more likely to start a romantic relationship. And among women, 15% would be less likely to want to date someone if they were a feminist, while 12% would be more likely. Britain's worst ever child grooming gang scandal exposed. Hundreds of young girls raped, beaten, sold for sex, and some even killed. Authorities failed to act over 40 years, despite repeated warnings to social workers, with up to 1,000 girls, some young as 11, abused in Telford. The rape hell of vulnerable young girls in Telford went on for a shocking 40 years, with as many as 1,000 children having suffered mercilessly at the hands of perverts and torturers since the 1980s. Girls as young as 11 have been lured from their families to be drugged, beaten and raped in an epidemic that the victims say is still ongoing. Well, why is this ongoing? Why are the British police so afraid of arresting adult men who are raping and beating and occasionally murdering young children? Oh, what's that? Authorities failed to keep details of abusers from Asian communities for fear of racism? Oh, so nothing to do with far-left ideology then? Nothing to do with running around smearing everyone you don't like as a racist, even if those people are pointing out that Asian, quote-unquote, men are raping young, defenseless girls. What's that? Council staff decided to blame the victims and viewed the abused and trafficked children as prostitutes instead of victims, according to the previously unseen files. Holy fuck, this is sounding remarkably like what happened in Rotherham. Specialist child abuse solicitor Dino of Bolton, Burn Kemp said these children were treated as sexual commodities by men who inflicted despicable acts of abuse. The survivors deserve an inquiry. They need to know how abuse took place for so long and why so many perpetrators have never been brought to justice. It's gangs of Muslim men who think of them as white sluts, and the council are so fucking petrified to arrest them because they're brown and fucking afraid of being called racists that they would rather let children get raped than be accused publicly of being a bigot. How's that? Do you think it'll be anything like that? And you might think, oh, you're being too mean. You're jumping to conclusions. You don't know. Yeah, maybe I don't. But let's just listen to the victims for a minute and see what they have to say. One 14-year-old, groomed and abused after a phone number was sold to paedophiles, said, I hated what was happening and my abusers made my skin crawl. But I was told that if I said a word to anyone, they'd come for my little sisters and tell my mum was a prostitute. Night after night, I was forced to have sex with multiple men in disgusting takeaways and filthy houses. I must have been getting the morning after pill from the local clinic at least twice a week, but nobody asked any questions. I fell pregnant twice and had 2 abortions. Hours after my second termination, I was taken by one of my abusers to be raped by more men. Just random men. No particular details given. So Sheila Taylor of the NWG Network worked on the Rotherham inquiry. She said that the true scale of the Telford problem might never be known, just like in Rotherham, because many victims were unlikely to come forward. She said, there's probably a whole cohort of young people that are not identified. We are good at identifying white girls, but are less able to identify young men. Young people from ethnic minority backgrounds, from travelling communities, or with learning or other disabilities. Yeah, I bet you fucking are. A police investigation called Operation Chalice identified more than 100 potential victims abused between 2007 and 2009. The cops said there could also be as many as 200 perpetrators. But just 9 were caged in, then the case was closed. There we go, it's all done. And what do you think their opinion on young white women in Britain are? Oh, it's respectful, is it? Are they all a bunch of fedora tippers, are they? Or do they think that white women are good for only one thing, for people like me to fuck and use as trash? There are people who are going to call me a racist, even though I can actually name these perpetrators. But the far left doesn't give a shit, and like I said, it's not like these people haven't even fucking killed people either. For example, Lucy Lowe, 16, was killed in 2000 along with her mother and sister after her 26-year-old abuser, Azhar Ali Mahmood, set fire to their house. He targeted her in 1997 when she was just 14, when she gave birth to his daughter. He was jailed for murdering her and her mum and her 17-year-old sister, but he was never arrested nor charged in connection with any child sex crimes over his illegal relationship with the schoolgirl. Her death was used as a warning to other girls, according to victims. One drugged and gang-raped by 9 men 2 years later said the threats drove her to attempt to... I can't keep fucking reading this. In 2002, 13-year-old Becky Watson died in a car accident that was reported at the time as a prank. Oh yeah, what happened there? The Mirror investigation found she suffered 2 years of an abuse by an Asian grooming gang, which began when she was just 11. Fucking hell! Of course she fucking was. Of course she fucking was. And like I said, I bet I get punished for reading this article. Her diaries were obtained by the Mirror and they reveal her torment at being made to sleep around. Her mum said she repeatedly told police that Becky was being abused and even gave them a list of suspects. She told the Sunday Mirror girls like Becky were treated like criminals. I was crying out for help, but I felt like I had nowhere to turn. If Becky's abuse had been properly investigated by the authorities, more girls could have been saved from going through this hell. The authorities care about racism. They do not care about British citizens. They do not care about the victimization of you by brown people. They don't care. They have an ideological block. It's being done by a brown person, therefore... So I think I'm going to bring the video to a close there. I was probably going to talk about more of it, but I'm just really sick of this fucking subject. I'm sick of hearing about this fucking happening in my country. I think this is absolute fucking barbarism.